I'm Chairman Randy Boyd.
Randy, one more minute.
Oh, one more thing. Absolutely. Have at it.
Are we ready now?
I get to do it again.
Yes.
She's nodding her head while she's.
We're ready.
Right. We're ready. All right. Welcome. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Technical Advisory Committee for Wednesday, June 2020. Once again, we are running this meeting remote as a result of the COVID-19 and Governor Northam's declaration of a state of emergency. The authority's Technical Advisory Committee meeting is being held electronically. With the recent passage of the amendments to HB 29, the FOIA bill, which is Freedom of Information Act, which allows regional bodies such as the authority and their committees to conduct business meetings electronically. This evening's business meeting is being held remotely. Doing so will enable us to keep safety as a top priority while ensuring that we're adhering to social distancing guidelines and requirements. Meeting by electronic means is authorized because of the items in the June 1st, 2020 committee meeting agenda are statutorily required and necessary to continue operations of the authority. And just like last week, we need to have a motion to accept the resolution so we can conduct this meeting electronically. So do I have a motion on the floor, on the table?
Motion.
So moved.
Armand, I need a second. Is there a second?
Second.
All right. And was that Amy or?
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Okay, very well, thank you. Anyone opposed, unmute and say nay. Hearing none, the motion is approved. We can move on to the summary notes from the last meeting on May 20th, 2020. I recommend that we approve the meeting notes. I need a motion to approve.
Motion to approve. This is Shangyang.
Amy, second.
All right. Not sure if my Wi-Fi just died out, but is there a motion? Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay, wonderful. Was there a motion to accept the summary notes from last meeting? Anybody?
There was a motion and I seconded it.
I must be winking in and out, so I'm not
Yeah.
here. Okay, was there a second?
Yes.
Okay, very well. Anybody who is opposed, unmute and say nay, otherwise it will be approved. Hearing none, it is approved. So now we can go into the 6-year program recommendations. I do have the email that was sent to the committee members, and I hope we were all able to take a look through it. I assume Mr. Jasper will be going through the presentation to outline what the committee needs to evaluate and adhere to. Mr. Jasper. Or Sri.
Yes, Mr. Jasper is still in the other meeting that is still going on. So I will start with this, and whenever he joins, he can continue. So as you remember, we started this process a year back. We received 41 applications. As usual, we have to go through a series of analysis, quantitative, qualitative analysis, and public comments. We finished the public comments just 2 weeks back. So here on screen you are seeing that summary of all the evaluations except the public comments in this sheet. Obviously you cannot read it, but you have the copy with you as part of the packet we sent out. It's available online too. This list you can see is ranked based on congestion reduction relative So there are two main quantitative considerations, quantitative factors we consider. One is congestion reduction relative to cost. So when we evaluate the projects and we look at each project separately and how much congestion on all different ways, roads, transit, everything together, per hours of delay, each project can bring in. It is a cumulative number we count from the day the project is expected to go online until 2040. We do that because that's how we do the model analysis based on the regional model, regional population and employment projections we have from Transportation Planning Board at MWCOG. So so the model we use for analysis has that data. So we look at congestion reduction from the day project is online until 2040, add that together, and then divide that by the total project cost. So this is more like a cost benefit analysis of the project. And our legislation, enabling legislation, says that we need to give priority to this analysis. There are other factors we have to consider, but this is the one we have to give priority to. So this list here is sorted by that CRRC rank. That you can see on the rightmost two columns are rank and the rating. And then the next two from the right is those two columns show the transaction rating and ranking. This basically looks at the 15 performance measures. In addition to congestion reduction, we also look at various factors, including transit crowding, connectivity, accessibility, environmental impacts, so on and so on. So we come up with a cumulative number for each of those impacts. And this is done under our long range span transaction. So that's why we call it transaction rating. So this also looks at the larger impact of the projects. That's the second consideration we look at. Then, as you can see, I can see there are two. One of the participants has two different logins. Can Priya please one? Yeah, thank you. There you go. So the colored columns are actually showing qualitative considerations. These are based on real numbers, but unlike the model analysis, we cannot really pinpoint it to one number. We want to kind of look at a range. So that's why we don't have a specific number for each of these cells. Instead, it has color coding ranging from light green to dark green or dark red. So essentially the green ones are good and red ones are not that good. And the gray ones means that particular project for that particular measure we are looking at, it doesn't have a value for that project. So in this case, with the different measures we are looking at are how much external funding are you bringing to this project. So each dollar NVTA is putting on that project is leveraged by other funding too, or other things like is there a funding gap even after NVTA put some money on this, or will NVTA's fund make sure that now the project is fully funded and it can be implemented right away. And also, we also look at past performance. For example, many of these projects are continuation projects. So if you look at that.
Please keep your microphone muted. You're causing feedback.
Thank you.
Please mute your phone, microphone, Pat.
Ria, can you mute everyone? We will come back to everyone for question and answer. Let me just go through this. I know that Keith and Monica has just joined, so after briefly taking you through these sheets, I will hand it over to Keith for the presentation. So as I said, we still have that echo coming. Thank you. So as I said, these past performance measures is looking at how some of these projects are continuation project. They already received some funding from NVTA and they are looking for more funding. In that case, how did they perform with the previous amount of funding we provided? Did they spend it on time? Did they spend it fast enough, or as they said they will spend? And then if these, we also look at it per jurisdiction level. If a jurisdiction received a number of project funding in the past, as a jurisdiction, did they spend it on time? We also look at how early the project can start and end, which is more like it's a proxy for project readiness. These are various factors we look at as a qualitative measure. So these multiple, based on these different measures we look at, and based on CRRC, since that is a priority we have to give to, we ranked and shows this analysis sheet with all the evaluations we have done. Can you go down to the next one, please? I think at this point, I will invite Keith if he wants to start with this or move on to the presentation.
Hi, Shri. Hi, Chair Boyce, members of the committee. Sorry to be late. I think if it's okay, the information I'd like to share is in the PowerPoint presentation. If Ria can load that up, then I'll get to that information quickly, and I'll try to avoid duplicating anything Shri's just said to you. So, Ria, if you could advance through this slide. These are the points I'm going to raise. Obviously, this is not the meeting agenda. This is the agenda in this presentation. Next slide, please. Just some important context here. You didn't cover this, did you, Shri? Okay, so the fiscal year 2020 to 25 6-year program is our fifth funding cycle, and you can see that in the bottom row. We have an amount approved for funding of 522 million, and we have requested amount of 1.44 billion, which means that the approved to requested ratio is 36%. And if you go up to the just above that to the row that's in bold, which is the sum and the average of all the previous funding programs, you can see that in the past we've had more like 55% as the ratio between approved and requested. So, you know, we knew from the get-go that we were going to be in a much more financially constrained situation for this program than any of the previous ones, and that is indeed how it has turned out to be. Next slide, please. Just quickly here, there are 3 pie charts which show the distribution by primary mode for the funding request. So in the left-hand pie, we show just a number of candidate projects. There's 41 candidate projects, and 21 of those, for example, are roadway projects. That's the largest slice. Even larger slice in the middle slide is roadway projects in terms of the requested amount of funding. In the right-hand pie chart, again, the largest amount is the highway slice, and this represents the total cost of the projects, you know, irrespective of what NVTA is being requested to fund. Next slide, please. So I don't think I need to dwell on this too much because it sounded like Shri was working his way through this, but there are 4 components to the project selection process: eligibility review, which is in the past. We're only considering projects, the 41 projects that are eligible. So that's good. The quantitative analysis that Sri was talking through, and the qualitative analysis, the multicolored chart there. So I think Sri covered all of that. And then the public comment, which is something that we've been working on most recently. So next slide, please. This is the chart that Sri just showed. So if we could skip over this one to the next one. Okay, so this is the summary of the public comments. And when the committee met last time, the public comment period hadn't quite ended. So we couldn't really share any information with you, which is just as well, because we actually got a lot more comments in the last weekend, and anything we had shared with you would almost certainly have been very misleading compared to how it ended up. But on the left-hand side, which is really all I want to focus on, is the distribution of comments by project. And there's one additional element to this that is referred to as other. That's shown in grey, but in green, obviously, that indicates support for a project, and oppose indicates opposition to a project. Just focusing on the four on the left, these four projects accounted for 85% of the total comments we received. The first one is the Nova Parks project to what they call dual the WNOD trail through Arlington. Mostly supportive, but a significant number of opposition as well. Even more so for the Prince William 025, which is the project to extend Van Buren Road northwards. And Van Buren Road in Prince William County is to the west of and parallel to I-95. So this basically is a corridor that opens up a missing link if the project happens. So there was a fairly equal amount of support and opposition for that project, based on, to a large extent, where you lived relative to the alignment. The next two projects are both from the City of Falls Church. The first project connects the WND trail at the western end of the city to an area close to a project that we funded in the previous cycle, which is kind of like the West Falls Church campus, quite close to West Falls Church Metro Rail Station. And then the fourth project is the downtown multimodal improvements in the City of Falls Church. And then you see that comments from most of the rest of the projects were supportive, but tailed off to the right-hand side. There are 5 projects with no comments at all. So pretty low level of comments once you get beyond the first 4, as you would expect, because there's 37 projects there with 15% of the comments. Just briefly, the graphic on the right is the same approach, same visualization, but with additional information included, reflecting the late responses that we received. The late responses are not included in the final summary report that we sent. I think Ria sent to you earlier today. There was an earlier overview or draft version of that was sent in your meeting packet. It took us a while just to finish everything up. What's happened here is there are a number of projects, particularly in the Route 1 corridor, that for which we received comments after the deadline, and so we're not able to include them in the summary, but we wanted to just visualize how that would affect the overall analysis. This analysis is caveated that there are some serious deficiencies in it, which is why I don't really want to spend much time, but we did want to illustrate that it did change the amount of comments for some of the projects and the distribution of the comments between support and oppose. And I would note that since this is drawn from highest to lowest, the order of the projects changes between the left-hand graphic and the right-hand graphic. But really, for all intents and purposes, we're only really focused on the left-hand graphic. In conclusion, I would say the late comments did not change our recommendations. They did essentially, either they would kind of reinforce what's on the left, or other factors outweighed the public comments. So if I could move to the next slide. So I just want to give you a quick overview, just 2 slides on the overview. We are recommending 19 out of the 41 candidate projects. 14 of these 19 projects are highly ranked. They're actually in the top 18 of the CRRC ratios. And I think Sri probably indicated that the CRRC ratios are a starting point for developing recommendations, and also something that's specifically called out in Virginia Code as a factor we need to give priority to when making funding recommendations. 9 of the projects that are recommended are continuation projects. That's to say they've received funding, regional revenues from NVTA in previous funding cycles, and 10 of them are first-time projects for NVTA funding. 15 of the 19 projects that are recommended for full funding, and in all cases, this will enable those projects to be completed. The package overall is we consider to be modally and geographically balanced, but do note that slightly more than $45 million of the funding is to projects where the primary mode is bike or pedestrian, which is a pretty high level of funding. I'd say probably unprecedented level of funding from NVTA's perspective for projects with that primary mode. Obviously, if we're funding 19 projects, that means we're not funding 22 projects, or at least not recommending funding 22 projects. Obviously, this committee and others could disagree. 7 of those 22 projects are continuation projects, and 15, if they have been funded, would be first-time projects. Excuse me. I do want to say in passing there that we're not turning our backs on continuation projects. We just aren't able to fund them all at this time.
So I can give you a chance to get a drink of water with this question, Keith. The continuation projects that are not being funded, are you going to get into why that is? Other than obviously there's limited funds, I get that, but are there other things that knock them out of the contention, if you will?
Yes, I'd be interested at least in knowing what they were.
Sure.
They're listed in the package that was sent. If you get to this page, you can see them. It's I don't know what page. It's a page with green on it, which I think we're going to get to later.
We are. I think in the package, it's probably about page 14. Yeah. So yeah, we're certainly not turning our back on continuation projects, and I'm happy to discuss how we reached a conclusion for any of the projects. But essentially, that chart that Randy has just identified is helpful from a visualization standpoint, because it shows in green the projects that are recommended, and you'll see they are concentrated towards the upper half of that table, and that is really what we mean when we say CRRC as a starting point. Not every project in the top half of the table is funded, and some projects in the bottom half of the table are funded. Are recommended for funding by NVTA staff, and I'm happy to come to those in a short while.
I didn't want to interrupt you, but I want to make sure we're going to cover it. So, thank you.
Thank you. Next slide, please. So overall, from a regional perspective, we like to maintain the multimodal nature of what we're doing. We always have, and this package does. A package of projects does do that, and so you will see a continued emphasis on road, rail, and transit in the Route 1 VRE Fredericksburg Line corridor, a continued emphasis on the Fairfax County Parkway corridor, continued emphasis on BRT solutions, bus rapid transit solutions. In particular, some synergies in this package of projects with projects we have previously funded in the Crystal City and Western Falls Church areas, an increased focus on grid network solutions, by which I mean kind of missing links or gaps in the roadway network, which enable trips from A to B to take place without having to congest already congested parallel arterials or other regional corridors, giving relief to both those corridors, as well as giving better accessibility and mobility to the people who can use those grid network solutions. And finally, as I've already mentioned, the increased focus on active transportation solutions, the bike ped projects in particular. Next slide, please. So I'm breaking up the recommendations in 4 groups. The first group has 3 projects in it, and this group represents the largest funding amounts. All 3 of these projects are continuation projects, and the largest amount here is actually a partial funding recommendation. We simply were not able to find a way to reach 183 million for the Route 1 widening in Fairfax County. But this project is important for a number of reasons. But the primary one being the Route 1 BRT project, which we're recommending not be funded in this cycle, needs this project in order to happen. So although we refer to it as Route 1 widening, it is adding a lane in each direction to Route 1. It is also creating median space for the BRT project to follow. So this project really does need to come ahead of the Route 1 BRT project. The other 2 projects on this slide, Route 1 widening in Dumfries and the Deep Street Transitway in Alexandria, as you can see, are very highly ranked projects, and we're recommending fully funding these. Next slide, please, Rhea. This group of projects, six continuation projects, accounting for 22% of the total dollars allocation, and these are listed in order of the dollar amounts rather than the CRRC rank. So we have a couple of projects in Fairfax County that this funding will bring to completion: Summit School Road Extension, Telegraph Road widening in Prince William County, which is really important because it opens up much better access to one of the, actually, I think the largest park and ride on the 95 corridor. The Crystal City station improvements for VRE, which is one of those projects where there's a lot of synergy between this and other projects we're funding in Crystal City. Oldley Highway multimodal improvements in the city of Fairfax, and also the roadway network in the city of Fairfax on the west side of North Fax. So these are the continuation projects that we're recommending. The next slide, please, Rhea. So here there are 7 new projects, first-time projects for NVTA funding. The first couple in Loudoun County. The CC to DCA, that's the Crystal City to DCA Reagan National Airport, which at one end, at the Crystal City end, ties into the VRE station, just mentioned on the previous slide, and also ties in to the east entrance, the new east entrance to Crystal City Metro Rail Station, which we have partially funded in the previous cycle as well. So there you see, some more of the Crystal City synergies going on, and that project, the Intermodal Connector project, is actually the lowest ranked project that we are recommending for funding. You see, it's ranked 35 out of 41, and that really speaks to modal and geographic balance, particularly geographic balance. The second project here from Arlington, Roslyn multimodal network improvements, Northwich mobility improvements in Prince William County, West Falls Church, access to transit and multimodal connectivity. This is one of those projects that I think was the third one for public comment, almost entirely supportive. And the Government Centre Parkway extension in the city of Fairfax, which kind of splits the difference, as it were, between 29 and 50 on the west side of the intersection on the west side of the city. Next slide, please. The final group of projects, these are all recommended for partial funding. And these are all new projects to NVTA as well. So the first two for 15 million each, Franconia Springfield passenger rail bypass. This is a project that will separate passenger rail from freight rail without with a physical bypass, as opposed to through the through the track system, where one train would have to wait for another to pass in order for that sort of crossover movement to take place. So this should allow capacity and reliability improvements. DRPT requested $100 million for this project, but that was not achievable within the constraints that we have. The Soapstone Drive extension project, this is in the western section of Fairfax County in northern Fairfax County. And what this project does is it provides a new crossing to the Dulles Toll Road and Dulles Airport Access Road and the Silver Line without actually connecting with the other road infrastructure associated with the toll road. So it serves local needs for sure, but it also means that the parallel facilities to the east, Wheelie Avenue, which is where the current terminus of the Silver Line is, and Reston Parkway to the west, both very saturated roads for much of the day. This will actually relieve both of those roads, as well as providing new access to the metro station for folks living in South Reston. And I think it also includes some additional bike ped facilities as well. And finally, the Nova Parks WNOD Trail Enhancements Project in Arlington County. So this is a Nova Parks application. It's not an Arlington County application. However, Arlington County Board are supportive of this project. Parks Authority asked us for 5.6 million. We only recommended 650,000. In part, this is due to the public comment that authority members heard at the public hearing, and that the public comment period showed us. While overall public support for this project outweighs opposition to this project, we felt the people who are opposed to this project made some very robust and thoughtful comments why this project should not rush ahead, and so this funding now enables the Park Authority, in conjunction with county staff, the county commissions, and ultimately the county boards, to take a more measured approach, including we expect heavy involvement with the community as part of a public engagement process. Before such time, certainly the Park Authority come back to us for any requests for construction funding. So it's basically covers the cost they expect to incur to do that preparatory work without providing any commitment to the construction. I've got a couple more slides. Go to the next one, please, Ria. Okay, so this is a summary table, kind of really speaks to geographic distribution and balance. So we have 13 applicants with the 41 applications, and the requested amount and share of that shown. And then the recommended number of projects, recommended amount, and share of that recommendation. And I want to draw attention to a couple of things. Any jurisdiction or agency who submitted 2 or more requests did not get all of their requests met. By and large, it was about 50% of projects requested were funded, not necessarily 50% of the funding request, but certainly no more than 50% of the projects requested for those who submitted 2 or more. 6 jurisdictions and agencies submitted 1 application apiece, and there were 3 possible outcomes. So in the case of Alexandria and the town of Dumfries, we recommend fully funding their applications. For the Nova Parks project, as I just mentioned, and the DRPT project, as I just mentioned, we're recommending partial funding. And for the town of Leesburg and the town of Vienna, who submitted 1 application apiece, regrettably, we're not recommending anything in this cycle. And if we could go to the next slide, we have one other summary table that looks at the modal distribution. So you see for roads, intersection type projects, the share of the total request was 75% and the recommendation is 71%. Similarly, transit requests were 21% of the total and 20% of the recommendation. And you'll see that bike ped was the request was 4% of the total and the recommendation is 9%. So if anything, bike ped has kind of overperformed here, but it's reasonably balanced in the sense that taking these 2 slides together, we always try to make sure that across the region, there's a good distribution geographically, and also that there's a good distribution by mode, and that kind of has to reflect the applications that we receive as well. So we'll see if we don't get, actually in some cycles we have funded a high proportion of transit projects relative to highway projects, but in this cycle that wasn't really possible, in large part because of the funding constraints that we had. I've got one more slide, and then I wanted to jump to something else. So you see under June 17th, this committee meeting is listed. The PCAC meeting has recently concluded, and our planning and programming committee will meet on Friday at 5 p.m. And each committee, we're asking to make a recommendation to the authority, and the PPC coming last will attempt to consolidate those to prepare for the authority meeting on July 9th. We will post final recommendations before that on no later than June 24th. If we can beat that by a couple of days, we will. But it really depends what happens after I finish, and what happens at the PPC on Friday. And I just wanted to make everyone aware that the anticipated date for the next call, NVTA's next call for regional transportation projects for our fiscal year 22 to 27 6-year program will be July of 21, which is just 12 and a half months from now. So that is pretty much all I've got to say. I don't know, Chair Boyce, if you'd like me to go back to that green and grey chart in the meeting packet to kind of maybe kick off the discussion, if Ria could perhaps get that loaded, and then kind of address Mr. Spielberg's question about what was and what wasn't funded and why.
Yeah, I was not able to find that in the package, so maybe I just wasn't looking at the right place. So,
okay, well,
when it comes up, Frank, I do have initial conversation points and questions on this. There are several projects near the top that were highly ranked that have been funded in the past. I know at least 3 of them have progressed in some way. I know Germantown Road and Route 29 is designed now. Would that not funding at this point put them into a with them being the city of Fairfax, into a position where they can't go forward with a project that's been funded in the past. Similar to that, and I'll let you answer in just a moment. Similar to that is the intersection improvements at Eaton Place and the Route 28 corridor. Really interested to hear about the Route 28 corridor not being funded. That's a big to-do down in Fairfax. It spreads out into the non-NVTA area, So I open the conversation for those specific projects as to why we're proposing, or not funding, but say.
Sure. Do you want to respond now, or do you want me to wait for more questions?
If you've got, I don't want to inundate you with questions. I think if you could probably offer an answer to that, might answer some other questions that are coming at you.
Sure. Well, let me have a stab at that. So yeah, you rightly point out there are 4 projects in that top 18 that are not recommended for funding, and you just probably in part I want to answer this question at a higher level. So we have $1.44 billion of requests chasing 522 million, and we knew we were not going to be able to fund everything, and that included not being able to fund every continuation project. And I want to emphasize again, we're not turning our backs on any continuation project, but it's just simply not possible to fund all of them. But it's a fair question as to why those in the top part of the table. Now, the Germantown Road Route 29 project is a new one for us, I believe. I don't think we've put any money on that project before. The other 3 there, certainly we have put money on those projects before.
They might have funded that through their, I guess, the share that they get of NVTA funds. I may have that confused.
They may well have funded it through their 30% revenues rather than the regional 70% revenues. That's true. I don't have that information to hand. So,
Understood.
So basically, let's just start with the 2 City of Fairfax projects, which are ranked 1 and 8. The approach we've adopted here is that City of Fairfax have only 5 projects, and in recommending 3 of them, our understanding is that the other 3 projects that we are recommending are in a better place to proceed using this money at this time. So this is where we kind of deviate from strictly applying CRRC to more of the pragmatic type information on the qualitative side. So that really is the short answer here. Something had to give for the City of Fairfax in terms of what we could recommend, because all 5 of their projects were very high performing projects on this scale, but those other 3 were the ones that really were best positioned to kind of move with the money that's available at this time. And to be honest with you, that's for the 2 Prince William projects. That's kind of the same position with the Route 28 project in particular, which is the project that kind of bypasses Manassas Park as well as parts of Prince William. It ties into a Fairfax County Route 28 project that we're funding at the northern end, and it ties in with the City of Manassas project that we're funding on Route 28 at the southern end, depending on what alignments we end up with. So definitely that's a really important project. But in the case of that project, I don't have the numbers with me, but there is a large amount of NVTA money on that project. Even if we had funded the request for an additional $50 million for this project, there would still be a funding gap for this project, which essentially means all the construction money that we've allocated previously and would allocate if we met this request is locked up. It can't be used for that project until other things happen. but it could be used for other projects in this cycle. So that really is the answer I would give. And I think I would add that in the case of Prince William County, I think they submitted like 10 projects overall,
Yep.
and we only funded the North Woodbridge one and Summit School Road Extension, which again projects that I think the county is ready to move on. The North Woodbridge one is new to us. The Summit School Extension is a continuation project. So that's kind of the thinking that goes into that.
Okay, so I can understand the Summit School because it's connecting to the large park and ride, and providing enhanced accessibility to that.
Yeah.
I still question why we're not funding the top.
Germantown.
Germantown.
So,
Yeah, go
if I
ahead.
could, talking
Absolutely.
in talking with the city of Fairfax, they say that the other projects were more of a priority at this particular time, even though it was the #1 scoring project regarding their capacity to undertake certain projects. The other projects that we're recommending funding on were of a higher priority in regards in positioning of ready to go. And that's getting back to what Keith said. These projects were more ready to go. They were more advanced than the Germantown Road. And like Keith said, the city submitted 5 projects. We are recommending 3. We do have a balancing issue that we try to be cognizant of as well. But Germantown Road, this particular project was a new submission for NVTA.
Understood. And I appreciate that City of Fairfax had a say in the matter, and that makes a big difference.
Yes.
Thank you. Another
because we definitely needed a explanation regarding why the #1 scoring project wasn't being recommended.
Yeah, I was going to say you're going to get some phone calls about that probably. Another question is the Arlington County one down towards the bottom. It's the intermodal connector, Crystal City to Reagan Airport. My understanding is that's due to the Amazon development. And I question why NVTA would be funding what is basically a developer project in that area. I understand that it's a big developer project and the Commonwealth has an interest in getting that there. But is this a true NVTA function?
A good question. Undoubtedly, the HQ2 location decision has kind of put a bit more focus on this, but our approach to the evaluation was consistent with the way we looked at other projects and the way we've looked at projects in previous cycles as well. So we're looking for transportation impact, and long before it was known that Amazon was coming to that location, we've already funded a number of Arlington County projects in Crystal City. We'd already put money on the second entrance to Crystal City Metro Rail Station. We've been funding the VRE station improvements and relocation for a number of funding cycles. And this airport connector, ties in through the VRE station, and then a one street crossing to the new east entrance to Crystal City Metro Rail Station. So, I can see why it might look like it's a developer type project, but that's not the way we looked at it. And historically, we've funded a lot of projects in the Crystal City area, and I know Arlington County wants to make Crystal City a real transportation hub. And I think in many ways that airport connector is probably the last piece of that hub. And functionally, the way we would expect it to work would be that people who are, in Crystal City, can obviously take Metro for one stop to the airport. as they do today. But we also understand that a lot of people actually drive that one stop, maybe via Uber or something else. I think as VRE maybe expands its service offerings in the future, yes, potential for more VRE passengers to use the airport and that connector will be really convenient as well. So yeah, I understand where you're coming from, Randy, but
I don't mean to indicate that there's something nefarious going on.
Sure, no inference taken at all. No, I would note again that it is the lowest ranked project, and there are factors like geographic distribution and long-term benefit which begin to come into play as well, which is why we wanted to add an extra Arlington County project in here too. So this one fits the bill very well, even despite its low CRRC ranking.
I didn't mean to indicate that there was something nefarious or anything. It was more of I understand what this is doing and where this is, and concerned that NVTA may be looking at it,
Right. No, if I could, Chairman Boyce, and that's a fair point. I would go back to when transaction was adopted, or even when we had the, I guess, call for projects for transaction. This has been in our long range plans a lot longer, or years prior to the knowledge that Amazon was coming to Crystal City. I do understand now with the timing of it, it may appear that, oh, this is a developer project. And to be honest, a lot of these projects have economic development incentives to them. And
as part of the charge, I get that, yes.
Yeah, but for us, we evaluate them primarily for their congestion reduction relative to cost. The other thing that I will note about this particular project, and looking at the applications and the scoring and things of that nature, something Keith said previously, I think the authority in total, we've invested just shy of $200 million in the Crystal City, or 100 million, I should say, a little over $100 million in the Crystal City area, or now what they're calling National Landing. And again, this was prior to our knowledge about H2Q. That was just really showing, the needs when BRAC left. And this is something that I actually told a reporter, people saying, oh, how, so now you have Amazon. It wasn't about Amazon. It could have been any business, but the model showed us, due to the population and employment increases in the area, we definitely need to invest in infrastructure.
Fair enough. Frank, I think you had a question. I recognize you.
I think my question was, what were the projects that were not funded? And that question has been pretty much answered now. The continuation projects that were not being carried forward. And we've now discussed that, I think, for quite a while.
So in the interest of not having everybody pile on with questions, I think I'll go one by one as I see on the screen. And if you don't have a question, just say so, and we'll move on to the next person. So Amy, do you have any questions for this?
I do. Keith, I wasn't clear on how you came up with the percentages, or is there any kind of methodology on what the percentages of money recommended by mode choice?
Right. We don't have any formula that we apply. State Virginia code wouldn't allow us to do it that way. So what we try to do is use this what I refer to as modal and geographic balance to make sure that we aren't just funding highway projects, that there is a role for transit, and vice versa as well, for that matter. What we try to do at the end of the process, before we kind of say, yep, this is the final set of projects, is look at them and say, have we got reasonable coverage across the region, recognizing that our funding is based upon tax receipts in Northern Virginia, across all jurisdictions. So we have to make sure, not on a one-to-one basis, but we have to make sure that we're being reasonable in the distribution of the revenues. So we'll always prioritize on the best projects, but if there appears to be an imbalance, in one part of the region, we'll potentially skip a higher performing project in order to fund a lower performing project, because that helps us to address either geographic or a modal balance issue. So it's not set in formula. It's more of a judgment.
And my follow-up with that, then, if I may, is some of the early, and I would say very early indications coming out of COVID, or not even coming out of it, but in the current COVID situation, is that there is a public reluctance to take public transportation, at least in the short term, and a more reliance on more like pedestrian and bicycle modes. Was that a consideration at all, or is that too early to even consider in this venue?
Well, first of all, I certainly share the concern, because we've been tracking it as well, that CDC guidelines seem to suggest avoid transit and drive alone in your vehicle, and where you can, walk or bike. But honestly, the answer to your question is it's too soon to know how that is going to play out, and so therefore we have no basis for really even doing any sensitivity analysis for this program with respect to the impacts, or the impacts in the post-pandemic world. That's something that's more for our next long-range plan update, when we'll be a bit further advanced through the pandemic, hopefully, and we can understand whether there are any kind of new normal, as it were, travel behaviors, be that increased work from home or increased reluctance to use transit. Because obviously there's some wide-ranging ramifications that will be positive in the case of work from home, but negative in the case of avoid this mode and use this mode, kind of a thing.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman.
Welcome. Armand? You're muted if you're speaking.
Okay, can you hear me now?
There we go.
All right. Couple of questions. One question isn't really so much about decision making or anything about that, but looking through the projects, and I haven't read through every project in detail, but just doing a search, it doesn't seem like there's much in the way of ITS. I'm just curious, is you guys not seeing a lot of? I mean, in the past there have been ITS projects, granted not a huge number, but it doesn't seem like I don't see any on this list. Or there might be some that have something as a component, but nothing as a primary factor. Is that? I'm just curious if that's what you're seeing as well, as far as this list goes.
Armand, you're absolutely right. I can't give you an explanation that there are no ITS projects in here. I'm not even sure there are any projects that have it as a secondary mode, unless of course you consider a traffic light as ITS, which is very, very marginal. No, I mean, we evaluate what's submitted. There's certainly plenty of things in transaction.
This is not a comment on what you guys have done. I'm more curious about why these agents, if I'm just curious why what's happened that there's no projects. It's nothing to do with you all. It has more to do with the people submitting the projects. It's more of an aside than anything else, and just a curiosity that I was wondering about.
Well, let me back up just a bit. I mean, historically, the ITS projects that we have funded have been in response to applications from Arlington and Alexandria. I don't believe we've received ITS type projects from any other jurisdiction. in Alexandra, we are recommending the Duke Street Transitway project, and that will most certainly include transit signal priority, which we would consider to be ITS. But we have previously funded TSP in the Duke Street corridor, so I'm not sure off the top of my head how much more TSP needs to be done in support of the Duke Street Transitway project, but certainly if it's anywhere, it will be in that project. But I'm kind of drawing a blank on anything else. Yeah, it's a function of what the jurisdictions want to submit to us, what their priorities are in any given cycle.
Okay, I was just curious. Okay, it was more just a curiosity more than anything else. But I do have a question. As far as just going back to your distribution of funds, Fairfax County is going to be getting nearly 40% of the overall money. Is that going to be? Is that going to cause any issues? I'm just curious as far as pushback with them getting, that larger percentage of the funding.
Well, well, when you say pushback, do you mean pushback from Fairfax County that it's not enough, or pushback from everybody else that it's too much? I guess that's the same thing.
Exactly. The latter rather than the former.
Okay. The situation is that we evaluate the projects and we make the allocations, based on qualitative and quantitative information that we have, and then geographic and modal balance kind of comes at the end. In the case of Fairfax County, they're between 40 and 50% of population.
I think they're they're 48% of the population, and I think we get just shy of 43% of the revenues from Fairfax County. And I think, Armand, when you take into consideration that they're the largest locality in the Commonwealth, their projects really are on a more grander scale, and scope, if you will. And because of that, the price tag is a little higher than the other projects. Even looking at the projects we were able to make a funding recommendation on versus the number that was submitted, even with Fairfax, we're like, look, I think they requested to the tune $800 and some odd million. We just didn't have that funding available. One thing I would note, and this gets to Frank's question earlier, because I've received this question, why didn't you recommend funding for Richmond Highway BRT? Well, just 2 years ago, when we adopted our inaugural 6-year program covering fiscal years 18 to 2023, the authority awarded $250 million on the Richmond Highway BRT. So that's the largest award we put on any project. I will note that. But at this time, the Richmond Highway BRT and the widening, they're sort of joined, but the widening needs to take place first before the county can really seriously get to the construction of the BRT. So I hope that answers your question. I think just given the population and the scale of Fairfax County's projects compared to other projects, because they're bigger, the price tag is more.
I think, go ahead, Keith.
I was going to say, just as a brief follow-on to Monica's comment, think back to the transaction plan, and what the analysis shows that the highest proportion of trips either start and finish in Fairfax County, start in Fairfax County, finish in Fairfax County, and so a project in Fairfax County is beneficial to many people who travel from Loudoun or Prince William counties, even if they're not stopping in Fairfax but going straight through. So, we think of it in those terms. It's not inappropriate that a lot of funding goes to Fairfax County, because there is a lot of regional need that can be addressed by projects in Fairfax County.
No, I think that all makes sense. I mean, in between the revenue factor coming in and the population, and that, I was just curious more than anything else. I just wanted to ask the question. But I think that makes a lot of sense. So thank you. That's all I've got, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Karen, do you have any questions?
Yes, thank you. I have a clarification question. I just wanted to just go back to, and thank you so much for such an informative presentation today. I just wanted to go back to the Nova Parks project where you'd indicated that due to the robust community outreach and comments that we had received about the W&O Trail, that it was part of the consideration as to how much resources is going to be allocated to this project. And so there was a significant drop from, a little bit over 5 mil to 650,000. So I guess it's like a two-part question on, is that significant difference? Is this project still viable, right? And then the second one is, if we're going to do such a significant drop, would it make sense to allocate that fund elsewhere? Like the Vienna bike share or something like that, or put it in with another larger project.
Thank you. So the kind of the background to the Nova Parks recommendation, their application identified $650,000 of the requested amount will be used for design, engineering, etc. And the rest, just under 5 million, would be needed for construction. So we have simply taken the view based on public comments, and public comments kind of focused on a number of things, alternatives analysis, runoff, the kind of impact on vegetation and trees, aesthetics. On the negative side, or on the positive side, we heard from a lot of people who said that this is needed. It's an important transportation link. Our analysis showed that particularly when you start looking out to 2040, that there is value that the project can bring, and it's on a congestion reduction relative to cost scale. It's not particularly expensive as some of these other projects go, which helps it to kind of rank a little bit higher. So it was a combination of things, really. That but perhaps one of the strongest comments that we heard was, the lack of public engagement on behalf of Nova Parks. So, our recommendation basically imposes a pause on the progress of this project. To make sure that the Parks Authority works with county staff, county commissions, the board, and the community to either come up with an acceptable solution or conclude that there is no acceptable solution. But whatever that decision is, that needs to be done before Nova Parks moves ahead with construction, and that's what this recommendation secures. So no, the project is certainly able to continue. They'd have to start with the design work anyway. So all we're doing this recommendation is preventing them to just move from design to construction without following due process, which we would expect any project we fund to follow due process, and that's what we want Parks Authority to do.
Great, thank you. That was my only question. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Dr. Zhu.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So I have a few questions related to the public comments, and we understand the late comments were not considered in the process. But are there anything noticeable from those comments? And also, are there reasons for us to receive so many late comments? Are there lessons learned from this process? Should we extend the time period for that in the future cycles? So that's my question number one.
Okay. Good evening. Good to see you again, Dr. Zhu. Yeah, I mean, it's difficult. The public comment period ran from mid-March until May 24th. That from that point on, we have a fairly compressed schedule to kind of summarize those comments. We need to summarize those comments before we can make recommendations and then work through the committees and get to the authority for a decision. So, we felt that 2.5 months was a good length for a public comment period. In fact, it was originally meant to be more like 6 weeks, but we added an extra month to that schedule at the front end for various reasons. And but there it is. I mean, I can't control when we receive comments, and I fear that if we extend the deadline, not only does it affect the process, but we're still going to get late comments. What was important for us was to kind of understand or to ensure that there was nothing in those late comments that would cause us to rethink our recommendations, but to not evaluate them to the same degree, and certainly not to summarize them to the same degree. So in essence, we got 55, I think it was, late comments, but one of those, actually 2 of those, one was a petition with 200 or 300 supporters on it, and one was a letter which included a lot of analysis related to something like a SurveyMonkey survey that the author of the letter had conducted. And a lot of people have replied to that SurveyMonkey survey, and we got the summary of the survey, and we got some kind of comments that were part of the survey, but they weren't really comments in the way that we mean comments. They were comments in the sense of, what else would you like NVTA to know? And so they were kind of only partial, incomplete comments. So what we did I showed you in the presentation on that right-hand visualization was we took what we received at face value, but we did not verify the accuracy of the survey or any other part of the late comments. We didn't eliminate any duplications. We can't really stand by someone else's analysis, particularly when it kind of forced us into an apples and oranges situation where we weren't asking for that sort of analysis anyway. We wanted the raw comments so we could do our own analysis rather than integrate someone else's analysis on, eight projects out of the 41. So it was just impossible to merge 2 data sets together in that way. But we have posted all the comments, including the late comments, so they're all part of the public record. And with that visualization and the final report, summary report of the public comment, we have referenced these late comments and how we handled them, and we included that graphic that I showed on the right-hand side. So I think we've reached the best compromise we could reach. But the most important thing I would say is when we looked at that analysis, we do not believe it changed any of our recommendations. There was the project in Prince William County where there was a substantial response that was close to 50-50 in terms of support and opposition. That project was too far down. Actually, let's see where it is on the scale here. It's the Van Buren Road project. So it's ranked number 23 on the list. So it was already in a difficult position in terms of a funding recommendation. There were a few projects below that what we did recommend for partial funding and one for full funding. But it's also a Prince William County project, one of the 10 they submitted, and they have much higher performing projects than this one. So it's unlikely that those additional comments would have changed that recommendation. There were comments for and against, but mostly for the Route 1 widening project and the Route 1 BRT project in Fairfax County. As noted earlier, we've recommended one of those projects for partial funding, which is number 25 on the list. Number 25 on the list. But we have not recommended the BRT project, which is number 20 on the list, which is a slightly higher performing project. But as we've stated earlier, we really need the lower ranked project to be done before we can finish helping Fairfax County to get the BRT project done. And beyond that, there was a mixture of support and opposition for other projects in that corridor, but for various reasons, mostly the geographic and modal distribution reasons, I do not believe we would have changed our recommendation based on the late data.
Thank you, Keith. My second question, I don't know if I remember right or wrong. Maybe in this cycle, in a previous cycle, we had this early project, Route 28 and I-66 interchange, which was probably 300 million, and later it was withdrawn. So do we have any so that probably will break the balance of the number of projects you can fund, because one single project would take a lot of resources. Do we have any thoughts about limit restrictions on those mega projects, if we won't call it that way, or it will be handled in the future on case by case basis?
Yes, that's a good question. We've never sought to constrain the jurisdictions in terms of the number of applications they can submit or the scale of those applications, providing they conform to all the eligibility requirements, and we apply a consistent process to evaluating all applications. I don't think it would serve any useful purpose for us to put those restrictions in place. Obviously, the $300 million project that you refer to was subsequently withdrawn because in that situation, the concessionaire for the I-66 outside the Beltway project said they didn't need any public money at all, and so the need for us to fund anything basically went away. Otherwise, that would have been the most expensive project we ever funded, but that never happened. I think the other thing I would say, looking to future programs, that certainly would not apply to this program, is don't forget we have debt capacity. I don't know what the precise amount of that is now, because it's probably been affected by the pandemic. But I would defer to Monica as CFO to address that anyway. But if there is a need in the future for a high performing but very expensive project to be funding, then we've got that option in our back pocket for some future point in time. But as of right now, although we're receiving a huge amount of funding requests for projects that in this case cost about $4 billion, I think it's also fair to say that the capacity of individual jurisdictions to move those projects to conclusion is such that I think will kind of impose some sort of cap for the foreseeable future anyway, without us having to impose one on top of that.
Thank you, Keith. That's all my questions. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Zhu. Pat Turner.
Can you hear me now?
Wow, there's a lot of feedback.
Sorry, I have no questions, basically. I just wanted to know about the W and OD trail, and that got answered, so thank you.
I think you're got your microphone covered or something. That's a lot of feedback coming back. But anyway, thank you for that. Does anybody have any other questions before we move on? Sorry, my Wi-Fi just blinked on me again. Does anybody have any other questions? Negative. Okay. Let's see. I don't think I have any. I did have one nagging question in the back of my mind. I understand the distribution of funds, but as a regional body, And I have to confess, Route 28 is one of my regional projects that I have to follow, and I've been following for a while. Not funding something that spans that part of the region is disturbing to me. I don't know about the rest of the committee, but just to me, I just want to make note that NVTA should be funding a regional project such as that. But go ahead, Monica. I'm sure you're going to.
No, I do, because we've invested significantly in the Route 28
Yes,
corridor
absolutely.
and on Route 28. And what I would say is Prince William is in the process of zeroing in and getting acceptance on the preferred alternative. So right now, because they don't have the preferred alternative, and given, I think they just, or Finance Committee just approved an SPA, or not Finance Committee, but we just sought authority appropriation, not the SPA, of an additional 89 million for the project that was in a previous funding program. I think the project is well positioned, so it is moving. When the county, number one, gets their preferred alternative approved, because I know there are some federal processes that they have to undertake. And also, I would note that this project was on the county's bond referendum list that was approved. So I don't know when the county plans to issue debt, but maybe during the next call for projects, we can sit and discuss with the county. Number one, do they have the preferred alternative, which I undoubtedly they should. But number two, will they need additional monies from the authority versus securing those funds through their bond referendum? But to answer your question, Randy, it really was a matter of, the timing regarding where we were in the funding process and where they were regarding getting finalization on the preferred alternative was not in alignment.
Okay, fair enough. Thank you.
Chair Boyce, if I may be so bold.
Absolutely, Keith. I would never stop you from being bold.
So what we'd like you and the committee to consider is one of two things. Either endorse the NVTA staff recommendations as is, if that is your preferred position, and if it's not your preferred position, we completely understand and will not be personally affronted if you don't like our recommendations. But if you wish to propose different recommendations, feel free to do so. But understand that we've fully allocated the money that's available. So any revision to the recommendations kind of has to be as there are some game, as it were, in that we need to identify where the money will come. What's the donor project to enable something else to either get funding or get more funding? So these are really the two things we'd like you and the committee to consider tonight.
Yeah, and it shouldn't be up to straight me. I think that if the committee feels strong about shifting priorities or shifting funding around, now's the time to speak. The explanations given to me with the questions that were raised, although I don't fully agree with some of the stuff, I'm not going to fall on the sword over it. I do question the Arlington County one. I still can be funded more by the developers than NVTA, being in the area that it is. But I also understand that that's been a project that's been sitting around, and the explanation given to me has been good. So anyone else on the committee have anything else to say to this? Frank, I see you gasping.
Yes, I guess given that I've only been on the committee now for a couple months, have not studied this process, and have certainly not given thought to these projects to any sort of the degree that the professional staff has, I would really feel uncomfortable really suggesting any changes other than based on, sort of, gee, I kind of like this project better than that project. But at the same token, I'd be really loath to vote to endorse. I mean, if a vote comes to that, I would feel I would have to abstain because I simply have not given the particular projects the kind of study. Now, I would endorse a resolution that says something to the effect of the staff has done, extensive background work, has done a lot of analysis, has prepared the evaluation ratings, has presented them, has sought and received and considered public comments, and we can laud them for their work. But I myself am not in a position to, would not be comfortable taking a position to particularly endorse the findings, though I would endorse the staff efforts.
So, Keith, are you looking for a resolution from us, a vote from us at the end of the day here? Or is this information?
I believe there is a suggested resolution in the meeting packet.
If I only looked at the agenda, I would answer my own questions.
We're here to help.
So this is a lot harder with the online and everybody muted and we can't have an open discussion, but I open the floor to recommendations on whether we proceed with the recommended action or proceed with a modified recommendation per Frank, or I see Amy unmuting. Go ahead, Amy.
Thank you, Chairman Boyce. I would just say that I think it's clear that the staff has done a lot of work in preparing these recommendations. And I agree with you, Randy, in that we may quibble here and there for pet projects or some other particular projects. But I feel satisfied that the staff has done due diligence and has really reached into the details of the projects and would feel comfortable in any resolution and accepting the recommendations as presented by the staff.
Do you want to make a motion to that effect?
I will. I'll make a motion to that effect.
Very well. I will second. Anybody say no? Unmute and say no and identify yourself. Or abstain.
Clarification.
Absolutely.
Are we recommending adoption of the program, or are we simply certifying the staff work with this resolution?
The resolution, as I understand it, is recommending the adoption of the program, recognizing that the staff has answered our questions as part of this meeting, any questions that we have raised. And as Keith has mentioned, we may be able to bring it up again as a separate item later, but right now we're recommending that the authority adopt the 6-year program. That's the motion on the floor. So any abstentions?
Yes, I will abstain.
Very well. So noted. With no no's and 1 abstention, I assume the others say yay. With nodding of head on the screens, I say the motion is passed. So the next item is Ms. Backman. You have an update for us for NVTA.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I will be brief, just thanking you guys as the committee for your work and efforts on this. This will all culminate to a potential July 9th adoption at the authority. And we appreciate your efforts because as we close out on the update of this 6-year program, we're really going to ramp up in the update of transaction where we will really need and rely on your expertise. And also, as you may probably recognize, we're 2 members short. We are working with Secretary Valentine's office to get those 2 additional members so the committee can be complete at 9. Thank you.
Thank you. Before we break, I do want to recognize that the transportation consulting community lost a titan in the past month. Ms. Pat Timbrook passed away. She's founded T3, and correct me if I'm wrong in anything I say, Amy. We want to send our deepest and sincerest condolences to you and your company and your comrades, as well as to Pat Timbrook's family. She was, I remember her from when I first interviewed to come down to Virginia 25 years ago. She was part of Frederick R. Harris, and I wound up not going to Frederick R. Harris, not because of Pat Timbrook, but Pat Timbrook did make a huge impression on me when I did interview with her. I eventually went to HNTB, which got me out of the accursed New York State winters and moved me down to the Virginia winters. So I always had a special place in my heart for Pat, and her passing was very sad. I wanted to note that.
Thank you, Chairman Boyce. I appreciate that. And I will say that she never forgot that you stiffed her.
Oh, it all comes down to how much you pay me. Any other items that the committee would like to raise before we adjourn? And then we need a motion for adjournment. And a second.
This is Amy. I'll motion to adjourn.
Second.
Very well, we are adjourned. Thank you. Have a wonderful weekend and safe 4th of July.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you.
Good night.